Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind, bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
Did you, out of curiosity, did you cry during the Dirty Dozen when we did it a couple of years ago?
No, but I did love that movie.
I was funny. They mentioned the Dirty Dozen in one scene. I was like, oh yeah. I was like, we already did that one. That was good.
It's funny because sometimes a movie will reference another movie, and that's always a dangerous game because if you like the other movie better, you start thinking about the other movie and you kind of like zone out of this movie. And that kind of happened to me twice in this one.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like, as saccharine and lighthearted as this movie is, it does kind of have this like postmodern-y thread to it where like the whole plot is basically like a very like knowing send up of another rom-com from like the 40s. I think it's called like A Night to Remember.
Yeah, 50s. It's a Cary Grant movie.
Yeah, right. So it's like it's funny watching this movie. I'm like, this really was a hallmark of the 90s because the 90s are when movies started getting like a little more self-referential about movies and TV shows, right?
Well, it's kind of an interesting time too, right? Like the 70s, 80s, 90s, it's the people who grew up who were the first generation to grow up on movies and TV and movies on TV. So I think that kind of influences some of the decisions that get made, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Even on the note of An Affair to Remember, that's Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr. It's the number 5 highest rated romantic film of all time.
well, shit. I guess we better watch that movie. Although, what if when we're watching that movie, Cary Grant looks into the camera, he's like, "This is kind of like Sleepless in Seattle," and then you realize you're stuck in a time paradox,
That'd be
and
great.
reality is crashing down around us.
Sleepless in Seattle actually does make the top 100 list too. It's number 45 if anybody's interested.
That seems low, actually, for a movie like this. I mean,
There are some absolute bangers on that list though. I think the top's like something like Gone with the Wind or something like that. But Harry Met Sally's like way up on that list. I can't think of what else I saw in there, but there's some like real good romance movies.
they're yeah, interesting. Okay, well, you know what? Let's get right into it. Blake, you said you were a little mixed on this movie. Why don't you share your thoughts with the class?
Sure. Let's start with what I liked. I liked Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan a lot.
Yes.
Especially, again, I've seen When Harry Met Sally, and I love that movie. And this kind of just feels like an extension of that character and of Meg Ryan. Like, she's kind of doing almost something similar here in that she's extraordinarily likable. And she has this kind of like goofy charm to her.
She's a little ditzy, yeah?
Yeah, a little ditzy. She's like insanely attractive. Like she just has kind of everything, which is really fun to watch her kind of navigate this world, even though, again, getting into the stuff that I didn't like, she's a very questionable character in this movie. Like, she at points literally is stalking Tom Hanks's character and his son.
In exchanging letters with a minor, yeah. Unknowingly, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I have to kind of talk about my experience with this movie because I knew that this was a romantic comedy. I knew it was about Tom Hanks. I knew it was about Meg Ryan. And then I like to experience movies knowing nothing. I just wandered in. I didn't even read a synopsis. I was like, so what's going on? So imagine my surprise when the movie opens with a funeral and
Right.
Tom Hanks has his hand on his son's shoulder and he's basically just like, yeah, she's dead. There was no reason for it, and we'll make ourselves crazy if we try to figure it out. And I was like, I've heard better eulogies, like, you know? So,
Tom Hanks, so this is what we said in the primer episode, that Tom Hanks, you have to believe him, that his character and his relationships with his son and, like, the heartbreak that he has over his wife, and even just, like, believe that he was hopelessly in love with his wife when she passed away as well.
yeah.
But I will say that, like, I don't know if Tom Hanks is the best dad in the world.
So, okay, you know what? I'm actually going to blow my load, so to speak. But, like, I almost feel like this movie was less of a romantic comedy and more like a father-son kind of movie.
A little bit, yeah.
Tom Hanks and his relationship with his son felt really more like the emotional heart of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And maybe part of that is like a consequence of, him being bereaved and again, like, I actually did take notes for this movie, and I'm gonna read one of them to you now. I basically wrote.
Is it bee allergy guy? Must be fun at parties.
No, no, here it is. I wrote, we are 15 minutes in and they haven't even met each other yet.
That is something that I think I respect most about this movie, and that it's so original, and it is kind of fresh to see a romantic comedy where the two main characters essentially don't really truly meet until the final scene of the film.
Yeah, and like, I'm not saying I didn't like it, because again, I did enjoy this movie quite a bit. I just thought it was interesting that like they don't really meet until the end, right?
Yeah, I actually really respected that. I thought that does it quite work? I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't been fully convinced that it quite works yet, but I think that it is such a cool swing.
Yeah, I'm actually like, I'm working on this new book right now about these characters who spend the first chunk of it together, then they spend the rest of it apart, and it's kind of interesting how you can like keep a relationship going even though the two characters are not even in the same postcode anymore. You know what I mean?
Well, and these two characters haven't even been formally introduced. This is pre-internet cell phones. Like, you're not easily connecting with somebody either.
There's no sliding into the DMs. There's no Hinge. Yeah.
Yeah, like Tom Hanks barely even knows that this character exists until the last scene. And like barely knows this character exists.
There's a couple moments where they like cross paths and like you kind of see it, but like it doesn't really happen until the end. But yeah, no, going back to Tom Hanks and his son, like their relationship was more what was like raising my eyebrows. You know what I mean? Like it's the son who takes the initiative and calls this radio program being like, my dad is lonely and he needs a wife, right?
Right.
It becomes interesting in that Tom Hanks does kind of start dating someone and the kid fucking hates her. Like
I mean, what's not to love about her? Crazy laugh.
Yeah, it's funny. I've said for years one of my weird pet peeves about people is when you make a joke and they laugh way too hard and you're like, okay, relax, it wasn't that funny. But like
she also has that kind of just like annoying laugh that sounds really forced, and I'm sure the actress playing that character, thought about how she was going to make that laugh. But there's just something to say about a laugh like that, that just feels very forced and unnatural in a sense.
And it's funny how much this 8-year-old boy hates her. Like there's that great moment where she comes over to like cook dinner and the kid goes upstairs to bed and Tom Hanks is like, don't you want to thank Victoria for the dinner? And he just looks around and he's like, thanks for dinner. I've never seen anyone cook potatoes that way. And he just wanders upstairs. I was like, wow. I'm like, you little bitch. Like,
he's great. Yeah, I actually thought Jonah was really, really good in this movie.
Yeah, no, he was like one of the best child actors I've ever seen. He was incredible.
Yeah. But you are right that there's something to that relationship that, here's the thing though, is the movie's split essentially right down the middle between what's going on in Seattle with father and son and what's going on I think it's Baltimore, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, what's going on in Baltimore with the Annie character, and is she going to leave Walter? Is she going to commit to trying to find this guy? And I think that because that plot thread of the story gets I don't know how successful that was in 1993, but it's definitely super stalkerish now in 2025.
Well, aside from like the stalkeriness of it, it's also just like, and again, maybe it's a testament to how likable Meg Ryan is, but it wasn't until like halfway through the movie I'm like, oh, like you're cheating on Walter. Like you haven't even met this
emotionally
guy.
Sure, yeah,
no, that counts as cheating. I'm like,
yep.
There's something really fucked up about this, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's the problem too. I think it's actually, if I have to lay blame, it's in the script ultimately, but partially Bill Pullman is just too likable.
I know, right? Like you can tell he's a little uptight and he's a little neurotic, but like he clearly cares deeply, deeply, deeply about her. I don't know, like maybe the worst thing you could say about him is that he's just a little boring, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, but then, I feel like, and like I respect the movie for not doing this, but I feel like a lesser screenplay would have gone out of their way to make him just super unlikable,
yes.
Like just
yep.
like the jock in Edward Scissorhands. You know what I mean? Just like, oh, well then of course she would cheat because he's a douche, but like again, Walter is just likable enough. Actually, like
I think he's too likable because even in the last scene, Walter scene, when they're having dinner and looking out at the Empire State Building, and she says like, "Oh, there's maybe somebody over on the Empire State Building that I might truly be in love with," and he kind of just goes, "Then what are you still doing here with me?" Basically, and he's just like
yeah.
so okay with her leaving him in this
No, I
moment.
know, right? Like it's actually like that. It's funny. That scene kind of made me fall in love with Walter. I'm like, fuck, I'd marry this guy. Like, like he handles the situation almost ridiculously gracefully.
Yeah,
So
I actually think that this movie would have been better if at the end we got just even the smallest amount of justice for Walter. Like Walter, she leaves, he walks out, and like I don't know, the waitress walks by and is like, "Oh, like I just heard what you said. Like that's the most romantic thing I've ever heard in my entire life." And the waitress is like a supermodel or something like
yeah,
that,
I
and
was
she
gonna
like
say
sits
right.
down. Like just like you need 30 seconds. Just give Walter something nice, you know? He
Yeah,
deserves it.
Walter did not. There's even that scene where like she hears that Sleepless in Seattle is back on the radio, so she like locks herself in like a closet with the radio, and then she lies to him where she's like, "Oh, well, she, you
After
know,
like elbowing him in the nose.
yeah, basically." So yeah, I don't know. Like that whole stuff kind of did take me out of the movie, where I'm like, and like they try to frame it as well as they can. Like, Tom Hanks talks about on the radio, he talks about like knowing he was in love with Maggie the second he held her hand. And like,
Mhm.
you know, before that, Meg Ryan is talking with her mom, and her mom talks about how she was working as a waitress when she met her father, and they went for a walk on the pier that night, and then they held hands, and it was like magic, and all this fun stuff. And then I did think it was like a really nice subtle touch where like, so during that scene where the mom is telling her story, Meg Ryan is trying on her wedding dress, and then as she's like slipping it on, like the shoulder rips, and it's
Mm.
just kind of like, oh, like, as far as visual storytelling goes, you're like, oh shit, like that's not good,
It's a sign.
right? And
Which is
then
one of the main themes of the movie, right? And that kind of goes into the idea of this movie being a rom com, the characters in the movie understanding that they're in a rom com, and kind of some fourth wall breaks there in a sense of being like, oh, it's a sign. Like, oh, this is, if this was in a movie right now, we would be like expecting things to change here.
well, I did really like, yeah, the almost like the central theme, or even really the central conflict of this movie is order versus chaos. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? There's a lot of stuff, like even in that opening scene with Tom Hanks talking to his son, he's just like, "Yep, she died. There's no reason for it, and we'll make ourselves crazy if we try to figure it out."
Right.
And then we see like Meg Ryan's mom talking about like how destined it was to meet her husband, and then the dress ripping and all this stuff, and that constantly keeps coming up in the movie where it's like, is it a coincidence? Is it not? Is it fate? Is it not? Right?
Yep. For sure. For sure. Like, there's even a quote about destiny in this movie later on.
Well, and then it's funny, like when Rosie O'Donnell is kind of admonishing Meg Ryan for being such a Meg Ryan about things, she's just like, "You want love like the movies."
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was kind of like, "Oh, interesting," because I'm watching a movie right now.
Yeah, I think that the self-referential nature of the genre can really work in a lot of cases, and I think for the most part it worked here. Although, again, like some of the concerns that I had about it's mostly the Annie's like stalking of that character that's a problem, right?
Right, and I mean, to Meg Ryan's credit, like basically they set it up where like she's hears Sleepless in Seattle, she hears stories from her parents, and she's realizing that like maybe she doesn't love Walter as much as she should, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she does have a conversation with different people, Rosie O'Donnell, whatever, where she says she kind of is chastising herself for her own behavior, and she just says, "This is cold feet, right? Like this is just cold feet." And I'm like, I guess, yeah, I don't know. Like, again, I've never been married, but like, I imagine leading up to it, you probably do have to reckon with some hard questions.
Yeah, I mean, romance in real life is obviously different than romance in the movies, so is everything else that takes place in a movie, right? Like,
Right.
I haven't spent a lot of time, I don't know, cross country in a phone booth pouring my love out or something like that.
Good.
This is a very weird. I don't know why that came to my head, but
I have
you know what I
no
mean.
idea what you're talking about.
There are things in movies that happen that do not make sense in real life. That do not happen in real life.
No, they definitely don't. But I mean, like, it is interesting. Like, the mom talks about blah blah blah, and there's all this conversation surrounding fate versus randomness and all that stuff. And I do remember, like, when you look at any relationship, if you really think about it, a lot of random shit has to line up for anyone to meet.
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
what I mean? Like,
Yep.
it's kind of a preposterous miracle that anyone gets together when you really think about it. Like,
Yeah.
when you think about all, like,
And stays together.
right, like, imagine, like, if you met your significant other at a party, like, what random sequence of events led to you and her being at that same party that same night?
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Anyways,
The butterfly effect.
butterfly effect. So, yeah, it's funny how, in some ways, though, this movie kind of wants to have its cake and eat it too. Like, there are moments where they talk about how ridiculous this is, or how silly she's being, or whatever, whatever, whatever. But then it's almost like Tom Hanks looking at the camera being like, okay, we are aware of how silly this is, but, like, if you're not this, you must be this silly to get on the ride. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I actually think that was very intentional, like highly intentional.
Yeah, and it is, like, it's effective in its own way, right?
Yeah, I agree. The part of this movie that maybe doesn't quite work for me either is this movie is quite funny. Like,
Yeah,
pretty much
it is
every
funny.
one of the jokes that is made lands pretty well for me. I actually kind of wish there was more of it, though.
Yeah, kind of. That is a good point, though. Like, even when you're not, like, I wasn't always laughing, but I was always smiling watching this movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that there are scenes where there's not a whole lot of comedy in it. And again, this is kind of actually intentional that Nora Ephron spoke about, that this wasn't intended to be a full-blown comedy or a full-blown romantic comedy. Like, this is supposed to be a little bit more on the romantic side of the romantic comedy.
Yeah.
The intention of it, too, the intention of, I believe his name was Arch, the original writer of this script. Like, he actually wanted this movie, Jeff Arch, yeah, he actually wanted this movie to be, like, strictly a romance, like a dramatic romance movie. And that didn't sell to Hollywood. Like, nobody would buy that script. And eventually, he was convinced to sell the script and have it be revised. And eventually, Nora Ephron got involved with it and punched up the dialogue, punched up the comedy of the movie. And that's kind of where we end up with here. But I actually think that this movie would have been better to focus a little bit more on the comedy than some of the still, like, dramatic parts of the film, because the comedy was really good and the actors portraying that comedy did a really good job with it.
I personally think the movie did a pretty good job, like, balancing those two acts. Like, yes, there is quite a lot of comedy, and the comedy's really good. Especially in the first act, they do really lean into, like, the grief aspect.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, there's that great moment when Tom Hanks just kind of sprawls out on the couch, and all of a sudden his dead wife is sitting there with him, and they're drinking champagne, and he asks her, he's like, what did you used to say to me? And she's like, I used to say, here's to us, right? And then they kind of just exchange this, like, weird look, right? Like, it's
Right.
almost like the ghost of his wife is, like, looking at him expectantly. And then later on, there's that genuinely heartbreaking moment when Jonah cries out for his mom in the middle of the night because he had a bad dream about her.
Right.
Tom Hanks has to comfort him, and Jonah, again, has that devastating line where he just says, I'm starting to forget her.
Yeah.
And it's like,
I
oof.
think I do agree with you. Like, you've actually got a good point here, where I think in the first act, the heartache and, like, selling us on from the standpoint of what this movie's trying to do as well. Like, it's trying to sell you on this sad story that women would fall in love with, right? And I think it's
right?
really good at that. Like, it's self-referential in that too, even. But I think that after that first act, I think that's where I would have punched up the comedy, is in Act 2 and Act 3.
Yeah, well, I don't know that I agree. I think the comedy was there. Like, all the shit with Victoria was pretty funny. Maybe Meg Ryan's stuff could have used a little more comedy, even though it's, I don't know.
I said to Jess when she appears, when her and Tom cross paths for the second time when I can't remember exactly where they are, but she's out on the road and the cars and everything, and they both say hello to each other after, like, having that obvious connection immediately.
Right.
I said to Jess, I was like, I wish that after she had said hello, he had been like, what? And then she would have been like, what? And that's how the scene would ended.
Yeah, that is pretty funny. Or she gets hit by a taxi. Thunk.
Yeah. There's definitely the other piece of that did work, even on that note, is despite these two characters having 2 minutes of screen time together and actually not really interacting with each other on any meaningful level until the last minute and a half of this movie, I actually thought that these two had a lot of chemistry together, which is wild.
Well, there's that great moment at the airport when he's putting Victoria on a plane and then he just catches a glimpse of Meg Ryan. He's just like, and then he almost kind of tries to run her down, but then loses her. So maybe the message as part of the reason why this movie clicked with so many people is this idea that, like, oh, your soulmate is out there and no matter what, you will bump into them. It's like you have this fated connection waiting for you, even if you haven't met them yet.
In a way, yes. I mean, there are definitely some plot contrivances.
You know what?
That
it is
get
funny
us
though.
To that point, though.
Having said that, there's a moment when Meg Ryan's on the phone with Rosie O'Donnell, and she basically is just like, "Is this weird? Like, am I being weird?" And Rosie O'Donnell's like, "No, that's what's strange. This isn't weird." And I'm watching it like, it's pretty fucking weird, you guys.
Yeah, I mean, Rosie O'Donnell's character is a pretty good friend, but also
I'm sure there are healthy marriages that started with a stalking type scenario, but don't quote me on that. I'm not a doctor.
We on this podcast are not condoning that.
No, unless you're Meg Ryan.
Oh, man.
I think my favorite scene in the movie is when Tom Hanks and Jonah have their big fight when, like, he is going to have a weekend getaway with Victoria. Jonah wants him to, like, respond to Annie because he's been collecting her letters. And, like, they almost have this big fight where it's almost like the roles get reversed a couple different times where Jonah's acting like the dad and then Tom Hanks is acting like the dad. And then, at one point, Jonah's standing in front of his door, his, like, dad's bedroom door. He's like, "I'm not leaving till you say you go." And then Tom Hanks just walks up and closes the door in his face. And Jonah's just like, "I hate you." Like,
I think that there's probably something there about, when a parent passes away and you're a kid and, like, how that impacts you, like, especially if it's the mom figure and the dad figure who's maybe a little bit less responsible is now suddenly put in charge of this kid, how you have to grow up a little bit more.
Yeah, right. I mean, what's that joke where it's like the world is built on the backs of great moms and okay dads? Like, yeah, I mean, honestly, you could almost rewrite this movie from Jonah's perspective. And in a lot of ways, Jonah is, if he's not the protagonist, he's the catalyst. Like,
absolutely he is.
He basically, like, gets on a plane and, like, instigates the whole connection, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, he's the one who's pushing for it, right? Like, he pulls her letter out of the stack of letters and it's like, oh, this is really well written.
He's basically just like, this is my new mom. So,
yeah.
And then I have to admit, though, like, maybe this is just a sign of the times, but, like, Jonah just sitting on the plane. And then I love the scene where he gets into a taxi where the taxi cab's like, "Where you going, kid?" He's just like, "Empire State Building." And they just throw him in the back of a taxi. I'm like, wow, I guess this was a simpler time when 12-year-olds could just wander around unescorted. He's not even 12. He's 8. Jesus Christ.
That's so funny because that actually never crossed my mind. That was never the unbelievable part of this movie for me, is that this kid could just, like, at 8 years old, just, like, flee across the country.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I'm not a parent myself yet, but, like, watching that scene, I'm like, oh, fuck, I'm getting so much anxiety right now.
Oh, that's so funny. On the note of Jonah, too, like, Jess and I kind of talked about this while we were watching it. We were both like, wow, Jonah's so young in this movie. For an 8-year-old kid, like, he feels so young. And I kind of was thinking about it, and I was like, this is another thing that's changed in Hollywood at some point over the last 30 years where older kids are playing younger like more and more often, right? Because I was like, I bet you the kid playing Jonah was actually 8 years old at the time that they filmed this, and I looked it up, and that's how old he was when they started filming this.
So he was an 8-year-old playing an actual 8-year-old.
Yeah, and that doesn't happen very often anymore. I mean, you even get the Stranger Things where you've got 30-year-old playing like 15-year-olds, right? And like it's kind of
It's odd.
interesting how
Yeah.
that changes our viewing on like, going back to older movies and seeing people playing their appropriate age.
Maybe that's part of the reason why this performance works so well is because he's an 8-year-old playing an 8-year-old, right?
Yeah, and I think that you're onto something there that like there's probably that experience of being in that age that you're just kind of acting natural, right? Like you don't have to try to put on a performance when that's your actual age.
Yeah, and this is high praise. It didn't seem like the kid was. It didn't really seem like anyone was acting in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's high praise coming from me. So
Yeah. No,
acting.
I definitely agree. What I did find also kind of funny about this movie, and I feel like this is movie lingo and not reality, but there was like a lot of open conversations with family members about sex.
I guess there was, wasn't there? Now that I think about it, right?
Mom and Annie had a conversation and like the opening scenes of the movie.
Oh, like
And then,
Clockwork. Yeah, that was pretty good.
yep. And then Jonah and Tom Hanks had a nice conversation about sex.
Oh yeah, it's like, so I guess when you get a new mom, you're gonna have sex with her, huh? And he's just like, where'd you learn about that? And he's like, Jet has cable. He's like, oh, Jet has cable. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, that scene's kind of authentic in a sense, but it's also just like very. Some of these like discussions between people are very bold.
It is funny, like when Tom Hanks and his son are brushing their teeth together. That is another moment where I'm like, yeah, they do kind of feel more like brothers than father and son sometimes, don't they?
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when Tom Hanks has a conversation with his friend Rob Reiner, and he's basically just kind of like, so like, what's it like out there? And he's just like, oh, like, he's like, women want like, they just want like a cute butt. And he goes, well, how's my butt? And he just lifts
Yeah.
up the back of his jacket. He's like, it's not bad. He's like, is it cute though? And then they're having a conversation. It's like, well, what should I know? He's like, tiramisu. He's like, what? Yeah, tiramisu. He's like, well, what is it? He's like, I can't tell you. And then he's like, they start, and it's funny, like, it's like these are the conversations that clueless single guys have with each other, where it's just like, oh, you just call her up and like, just be Cary Grant. He's like, what? Yeah, just be Cary Grant about it.
Yeah, I didn't think about them a whole lot after that scene played out because I think Rob Reiner's character is actually pretty muted in this movie because, like you said, I think they realized what they had with the kid and Tom Hanks, and they kind of rolled with that. But there is actually something to be said about how authentic their friendship is.
Yeah, right. Like it's like slightly heightened, obviously, because it's a fucking '90s movie. But like, yeah, again, it's like when they're having that little argument about tiramisu and being Cary Grant. It's like I was watching it. I'm like, I've had arguments like this with my guy friends. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So
absolutely.
And now I kind of want tiramisu.
I am starting to get hungry.
You know what? Wait,
Oh,
wait, wait. Let
yeah.
me just ask, and like maybe this is the contention that I have with this movie. Do you buy it? Like, well, no. Let me rephrase. Like,
That's pretty open ended.
let me. Do you buy it? This is my sales pitch skills in action.
No, I actually streamed it on Crave.
Ah, funny. No, like I guess again, I liked this movie, but like, how romantic did you find this movie? Or like maybe more broadly, did this movie give you like the warm fuzzies that romance movies are supposed to give you?
I think yes, ultimately it did succeed at that part. Again, it's not the best representation of that I've ever seen. It's nowhere near my favorite movies of all time, but
No.
I think that it succeeded at, again, this movie is sold on its relationships. And it's funny because one of the primary relationships that we actually have to care about is Sam and Jonah. And, those are two characters that absolutely love each other. And that comes through and shines through really strongly.
Even though they're screaming at each other sometimes. Yeah.
But I did, and again, this is kudos to Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan that these two characters are able to convey that love at first sight and make us believe that, even though they only cross paths 3 times in the entire movie.
You know what's interesting, and I'm just kind of articulating this now, but like, I feel like this movie did work for me and I did enjoy it, but like I don't think the romance angle really I don't think I really personally clicked with the romantic parts of this movie. Like I found this movie really charming, but really it was the relationship between Sam and Jonah that I found the most captivating.
And I honestly, this is something I was going to say when we get more into like our personal reviews. I wasn't sure that this is a movie that I would ever return to per se, but
I don't know that this is a movie I would put on a date.
On a first date, maybe.
That is a pretty bold swing, but hey.
I think that you're actually onto something with the focus on father and son here. Like, I kind of want to rewatch this movie and really just focus on that relationship.
I wonder, like, and like sound off in the comments if you know, I would imagine this movie would have a pretty strong fan base with like fathers and sons, like bereaved fathers and sons, you know?
That's such a niche like group of people.
Bereaved fathers and sons who live in Chicago or Seattle. Yeah, that's who we're aiming for.
I mean, if we have anybody who is even remotely in that situation, like I'd love to hear from you, but I don't know I don't know how much that exists out in the world, you know?
Well, Blake, that's where there's a will, there's a way.
Sound off, but I don't know that we're going to hear too much back about that one. I did totally see it coming that Sam was going to forget his backpack there and that they were all going to end up on top of the Empire State Building together.
Yep.
I saw that coming from a mile away.
Well, that is the fated conclusion, right? That is the climax.
And actually, on that note as well, like we're going to talk about score a little bit later, but I did find it interesting how the score of this movie is utilized because as soon as the romance part of the movie is, every time this movie wanted to convey that this was indeed a rom-com, the music livens things up a little bit. Like we get into more musical scores, and then there's large chunks of this movie that are really muted, and that feels like here's the grounded reality kind of situation.
I do kind of want to watch this movie again now that we're talking about it, because it does sort of manage to be like saccharine but grounded and like funny but sad and blah 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 blah.
There's something here. I don't know that it quite works as well for me as it does for you, but there's definitely things here to appreciate about this one.
One thing I did want to mention actually before I forget is I do appreciate that Meg Ryan chose to end her own engagement at the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like of her own volition. Like she seemed to have a come to Jesus moment where she was like, oh, like if I'm this obsessed with a stranger, then like maybe I'm just not happy or I'm just with the wrong person.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, justice for Walter, but
just hashtag justice for Walter.
The other thing that I did want to mention about this movie is maybe the believability about this character falling in love with a person's voice over a radio show.
Yeah.
That didn't feel unbelievable to me.
No, it definitely didn't feel unbelievable to me either.
Yes, times have changed a little bit, but now we're a podcast generation. You know, we listen to people more maybe now than ever, and you can definitely feel personalities bleed through into different parts of, the internet, right?
Well, it's funny. I'm actively dating right now, and one thing I always demand before I meet someone is let's do a phone call before we meet up in person. And like, I've filtered out a lot of bad fits that way. You know what I mean? Yeah, because, like if you can't hold a conversation over the phone, you probably can't do it in real life either, So
that's a good point, actually. Although I can't hold the conversation on the phone. That's not entirely true. I don't like holding conversations on the phone.
Well, then I wouldn't date you, Blake. How about you'd miss your chance with me? But
good to know.
Yeah. So, you can have a phone call with like a really interesting person, but after about 30 minutes you're like, that's it, I'm done. Like I have nothing to say to you. And then sometimes you just hear the sound of someone's voice or like the sound of their laugh and you're like, "Oh, I want to keep talking to this person," right?
Yeah, I've been said I have a very memorable laugh. I've also heard that I have a nice voice too. Sound off in the comments below if you agree.
Yeah.
And if you don't agree, keep your opinions to yourself, damn it.
Private message me, and then I'll compile them and send them to Blake.
Nice collage for my basement here.
Yeah, happy birthday. Here's all the people who hate your voice. No, it's true. All these women start swooning over this poor guy, and there's one character who says, "Oh, it's so nice to meet a man who's in touch with his emotions." And in my notes I wrote, "It was 1993. He was the first one."
Yeah, there's also something to be said. We haven't really talked about this too much, but like Tom Hanks did write or rewrite a lot of his character and like change his dialogue up. And I think that, I think he championed the male perspective really well.
Well,
in this movie.
you have to imagine too, and like I just made a joke about it, but like this was the 90s when like most that kind of behavior wasn't as okay, where like men weren't as brave with their feelings. So like I think one of the screenwriters who did one of the rewrites actually insisted like, no, like Jonah needs to call the radio because like no self-respecting man is gonna like publicly air their grievances. And I will say that like Tom Hanks sold that really well. Like he's obviously like super embarrassed and super uncomfortable when he finds out what he's been roped into, but like it is interesting like watching him kind of like resist but then like kind of settle in and kind of like get more comfortable with it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, that's a testament to his abilities as an actor. And
that shows. Sorry.
One more thing. I will say, and I do kind of like, there's that slight hint about the potential future of a relationship when Dr. Fieldstone, or whatever the fuck her name is, she's just like, I'm not trying to like make you uncomfortable. And Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, who are in different states at this time, both say, yes, you are.
Yeah.
And I was like,
I think this movie could have done a better job making me believe that these two characters are fated for each other.
Yeah, like more moments like that that show like the idio, how they have like they're compatible in certain ways, even though they don't know it. Yeah.
And maybe it's because we spent a little too much screen time with Jonah and Sam and their interactions and their relationship that kind of got crowded out. But I actually think that would have helped balance some of the stalkerness of Meg Ryan's character.
Right, because like as the audience, then we'd be on board. Like, oh yeah, no, for sure, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It is, and I'm sure lots and lots and lots of other people have made this joke, but like you could very easily like rewrite this movie to make it like a thriller.
What is it? Not Lethal Weapon. What is Tom Hanks?
Fatal Attraction, right?
Fatal Attraction.
Yeah, that's that great moment where he's yelling at his son. He's like, "Haven't you seen Fatal Attraction?" He's like, "No, you wouldn't let me."
I'm 8.
That was a good one. We should do Fatal Attraction at some point.
Yeah, we should. I've seen parts of that movie. I've never actually watched it start to finish, but
I feel like that's a movie that doesn't hold up.
Absolutely, it does not.
Shit.
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting one. Although that's a separate interesting conversation about like the erotic thrillers kind of thing, and like how that's kind of a moment in time that's maybe somewhat lost to our generation.
Yeah, maybe we should bring back erotic thrillers. I mean, I guess we just had Nosferatu recently. That was kind of an erotic thriller.
Yeah, I think that they've made a small comeback lately. Like Nora's not quite an erotic thriller, but it's also quite not an erotic thriller. It's close.
Yeah. Well, what could be more thrilling than eroticism? Heyo.
Nice. So sequels, prequels, and reboots. We already talked about in Affair to Remember how inspired by that movie this is. It's funny, we talked about The Dirty Dozen and also When Harry Met Sally a bunch of times. I also want to say that this movie made me think of one of my other all-time favorite movies, and that's The Blues Brothers. And the reason for that is because the song Stand By Your Man plays, and that's one of the funniest moments of the entirety of Blues Brothers is when two men sing Stand By Your Man in a country bar.
Oh, man, that is pretty good.
And then I went and rewatched like half of Blues Brothers on YouTube.
You know, I still haven't seen all of Blues Brothers.
Oh, man, you're missing out.
I think you showed me the first half, but then I had to run because the cops were chasing me.
Oh, man, that movie is amazing. I think one of my favorite like comedy bits of the movie is when Jonah calls back the radio station and is telling them like shot for shot what's happening on his dad's date.
Right. Yeah, oh, yeah. And she's just like, so, in the morning you just need to sit your dad down and express how you feel. He goes, got it. They just screams at the top of his lungs.
That's up there with like the Macaulay Culkin scream in Home Alone.
Oh, nobody. Yeah. Jeez.
It was great. I actually loved that. And then it also like pairs really well with Meg Ryan screaming in the closet.
Actually, one of my favorite characters in this movie, even though they're barely a character, is Clarice the babysitter. Yeah. There's that long shot where she's like walking to the front door and she's wearing just this like really eclectic outfit, and I was just kind of like, oh, I like her. Like I like her.
Yeah, she's kind of like pretty tropey as a babysitter, like the disengaged.
The disengaged teenage babysitter that Jonah probably has a crush on. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Although Jonah's got himself a little girlfriend, so.
Yeah, that's also pretty funny. I do love that scene where like he goes into Jonah's room and he's just listening to like a Beatles track backwards with his little girlfriend, and the chair very slowly swivels around, and it's just like, Dad, could you shut the door? And he's like, sure. They shuts it. They thinks better of it and opens it.
It's a really great face from Tom Hanks when he opens it up. Like, why am I the like kid in this relationship?
Yeah,
now?
Right. Or just like, how's it that my son has a girlfriend and I'm still single? That's gotta be a weird moment, and like as a young parent when you realize that you're. It's funny. My cousin told me this story about how his daughter, who was like 8 at the time, went to like a football game or something with like another little boy, and then she came home and she was like, Dad, I just had my first date. And he was like, what the fuck? No, you didn't.
Oh, that's great. Effects and filming. I really want to talk about this, like just how many times this script got rewritten and some of the process that this went through, because there's a lot of documentation online about this.
Mm-hmm.
So Arch started as the romantic drama, like I said. It actually went through 5 full drafts to the point where it got to being filmed. And so it was Nora Ephron didn't even get involved with the script until it was on its 5th draft with her, which is wild. But she did write the 5th draft. It was the only extra draft she wrote because the studio wanted to get moving. And she didn't feel like this draft was actually even like the best draft of this movie, but they just decided to continue on with it anyway, which is a little unfortunate because I do think, like I said, I think there's something here with this movie, but I don't know that it entirely works for me in every part.
I think I enjoyed this movie more than you did, but like
absolutely,
I do think it is kind of a miracle that it's as good as it is, considering that like 5 different greasy fingers got involved. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, and each person, and this is probably true with any rewrite or multiple writers, like each person brings their own intentions and like their feeling of the vibe, and like the tone of the movie and all of that, right? I think that Arch was obviously wanting to keep this a romantic drama, and I think that there were revisions that really hammed up the drama. Nora Ephron was specifically brought on to bring through like some of the comedy of this movie, because she didn't feel like this movie was funny at all when she got handed the script. So
that is kind of funny, pun intended.
And even
I guess.
she even buffed out, like her biggest contribution apart from the comedy and the dialogue, especially the snark in the dialogue, was she actually heavily rewrote both Annie and Jonah's roles in the movie.
Okay.
And she actually reduced the sentimentality that the original script had.
Maybe this was the best version though. Like maybe this is like I've said, like I was saying earlier, this might just be like the perfect middle ground of everything, right? Between preposterous and grounded and sad and silly.
Yeah, I think it's close, but I think it's close, but again, I wanted more comedy. The one thing that didn't change that I found interesting was the Empire State Building ending more or less stayed intact throughout the entirety of the revisions.
Okay.
And that's what actually drew, I think, a lot of people into this script, was that conclusion.
You know what? I would almost love to meet the 4 previous writers to see, like, that's got to be such an interesting and, like, maybe even heartbreaking process of, like, pouring your guts out on a draft, and then the next guy pours their guts out on the draft, then the next guy, and then Nora Ephron just, like, puts all your guts in a stew and makes her own thing.
Yeah,
This
I
has
think.
been Broken Metaphors with Michael Segan.
Well, I do agree though, because even like Arch had some concerns about the comedy that was added, and like I think he begrudgingly accepted Nora Ephron's involvement in this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, that's probably, as an artist, like one of the hardest aspects about something like film, because it's not just you painting a canvas, it's hundreds of people coming together to, or sometimes thousands of people coming together to make your dream and your vision a reality, and not everybody's
Yeah.
on the same page, and oftentimes people aren't on the same page.
Well, and then it's funny, like, like, are you then bitter that it goes on to become a sensation, or do you milk it? Like, it's kind of like, isn't the classic example, like, the original writer of, like, Pretty Woman wanted it to be, like, a dark and gritty expose on prostitution, and then some studio was like, make it a romantic comedy. And he's just like, fine, fuck it. And he made it a romantic comedy, and it was a huge thing. Although
I
that's
was actually going to bring up The Shining and Stephen King.
Oh, well, that's an even weirder thing because it's translating between mediums. And like the Pretty Woman analogy doesn't really work because it was the same guy, I'm pretty sure, who wrote
Mm.
both versions. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
No, at the end of the day, I think that's the unfortunate reality of the business, right?
and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So
Yeah.
yeah, like it's funny. I remember watching the first episode of the Obi-Wan Kenobi TV series like 3 years ago now, and I remember looking at the opening credits and seeing how many writers were involved, and I was like, "Oh no, this is going to be a shit show." And it was. Fight me in the comments. It was a shit show.
Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, again, like I said, Tom Hanks did end up rewriting his character quite a bit as well. Like, I'm almost surprised that he didn't get a writing credit for it by the sounds of like how much he rewrote. Like, he wasn't the one to call into this radio station.
Oh,
Because
was that Tom Hanks who did that? I thought that was one of
Yeah.
the other screenwriters. Oh,
I'm
okay.
pretty sure that was Tom Hanks who said there's no way that my character would be calling in to a radio show. Like, that's just not what the male experience is. At the end of the day, I think he felt that it was an underwritten character, actually. And so the character that we ended up getting was like a grumpy, funny Sam compared to what the original was. I honestly think that that's a major credit to him, to understand that this movie wouldn't have worked if the male character wasn't well written.
And I think that's why, like, as a male, and I'm putting male in like massive air quotes when describing myself, but like, I think that's why I didn't feel neglected watching this movie. And I think maybe,
Yeah.
if I may be so bold, and I'm just kind of spitballing off the top of my head here, like, I think that's maybe why men get a little bit turned off by rom-coms, is because they don't really feel that their experience is reflected. And I mean, a
Yeah.
large part of it is just like, I don't know, misogyny and like male fragility. That's part of it too. But like, as a male who's dating, I watched this movie and I was like, okay, yeah, no, I get it. Like, I'm along for the ride.
Yeah, I agree. And, rom-coms are geared more towards like women and women's
The
perspectives.
ladies.
And that's fine too, right? Like, as a guy, we get a lot of movies and a lot of genres and a lot of characters. And so it's fine if not everything's for us, but it is nice when
Yeah, we're content to have 80% of the market. You guys can split the rest.
yeah.
You're welcome. Like,
It's just I think that it makes this an easier watch as a couple, having like a trying to have a nice night together, having a nice movie night together.
I did want to say, like, so I watched this with 5 Sharpay. I'm actively dating, and I watched this with 5 Sharpays. And I assumed you would be watching this with your wife. So what was that experience like?
We were both very on the same page with concerns about the movie and the pacing, and wishing that there was a little bit more comedy. So this is spoiling our reviews a little bit.
I mean, we're pretty
Both
much there already.
We're getting there, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess we can circle back to some of the other stuff. But personal reviews and the partner factor for us, like, both of us would probably put this on the same tier of like a 6 out of 10, maybe, where we both liked it, but it's not an all-timer for either of us. And both of us have kind of our pre-decided, like, these are some of the great rom-coms, romantic films of all time that we both kind of love. She also has a much deeper relationship with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan in You've Got Mail, which is a movie I've never seen before.
That's by the same director, right?
It is same director and same two pairing, right?
Shit.
And she likes that movie quite a bit more than this one, and kept reminding me of that as we were watching this one. Even like, again, Harry Met Sally, like that's one of our all-time favorite movies, and that's Meg Ryan again, and it's Nora Ephron back in the writing seat. And it's tough because you're always comparing, especially when there's so many people involved in the same thing. You're just kind of comparing it to those other references that you have.
Like a slightly inferior product, maybe, or a prototype.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a way, yeah. So I think that's ultimately where we landed on this one. So
Okay.
I don't know. You were a lot higher on this, right?
I was a lot higher on this. Again, I watched this with 5 Sharpays because I'm dog sitting, and they stopped biting me for 2 hours while this movie was playing. So I think that's a good review from them too.
I kind of wonder too, this probably speaks to a little bit like maybe yours and mine approaches to relationships and romance. Like, I think I'm a lot more cynical than you are. I think you're a little bit more like, want to be swept off your feet kind of guy.
Well, I am an artist, and you are an accountant.
That's exactly it, right? So,
I think we just hit the nail on the head.
So I genuinely think that that's just like a slight personality difference that your mileage is going to vary with this one.
Which is funny because even I would agree with that approximation of the two of us, but like I wasn't really that interested in the romantic stuff. I was more interested in like the father-son shit.
Right.
So
you came for the romance and you left with just a great father-son movie.
Yeah, right. I turned this movie off and I was like, I wish my dad was still alive.
Jesus.
It's my tragedy. I can make jokes about it if I want.
That's true. Yeah. But you're not allowed to laugh, Blake.
Yeah, stop laughing.
Oh, Jesus.
It's funny. It's like when something embarrassing happens to me and I tell people and they start laughing and I'm like, stop laughing. It's not funny.
It's true.
Shit.
Oh, man. Nora Ephron also had the intention of like playing with the genre and playing with this film going into making this movie. Like the quote here is that our dream was to make a movie about how movies screw up your brain about love, and then if we did a good enough job, we would become one of the movies that would screw up people's brain about love forever.
Well, shit, Nora, you did it. You crushed it. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's funny, and like there really is like a real like metafictional thread to this movie where like people are talking about signs and like, oh well, and then it's like, no, well this is all random, and I'm like, bitch, you're in a work of fiction. Nothing in a work of fiction is random. It is all by design.
Actually, even this is going to be an insane comparison, but I'm going to make this comparison anyway. The Matrix Resurrections is a movie that is kind of focused on the same thing about taking an idea and the audience's perception of what it should be and kind of flipping that on its head. Now, that movie, far less successful at that, even though I like that movie a lot of people really, really hated that movie's guts.
Well, I never saw it, so yeah.
I guess to wrap up effects and filming, I did see that some of the characters or some of the actors that were kind of offered the role. And let me throw out some names for you and
say a name, and I'm going to say yes or no whether or not I think it would have been believable.
Julia Roberts.
Yes.
She was offered the role originally, turned it down.
Okay.
Kim Basinger.
Maybe. I don't really know her that well.
Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yeah, probably.
Jennifer Jason Leigh.
Don't know.
Jodie Foster.
Yeah, she could have done it.
I'm going to argue that Meg Ryan is ultimately the best choice for this.
Oh, yeah, 100%. But I'm just saying, like, it would have been a different movie, but I think it might have worked with the ones I said yes on.
I don't know. I don't know if this movie works without Meg Ryan. I think she is truly, like, the best at what she's doing in movies like this.
She's the best she is at what she does, but what she does isn't very nice. Meg Ryan
What's
is...
that from?
That's a Wolverine. That's his catchphrase.
Nice.
Yeah. Meg Ryan is Wolverine.
Wouldn't that be an alternative universe?
Hey, like, I'm talking to God right now. Like, if I am living in a simulation, have that movie come out right now.
look back at the times. We've already talked about the movie poster and how much we both really find this movie poster iconic. And we also said like there was some stuff in here that we're literally on the edge of not understanding the references. I think the Paul is dead one, like when we talked about the Tom Hanks walking in on his son and his little girlfriend listening to the album backwards. Like, if you didn't know that, that just makes no sense.
I guess, right? That's kind of a non sequitur. It's funny that we both know that, though.
Yeah.
Because we're culturalists.
Because we're culturalists.
Well, there's that great moment where he's like, Dad, did you know if you listen to this backwards, it says Paul is dead? And he's like, yeah, I know. And the kid's like, how do you know?
And then there's also like a quick throw out line about the soup Nazi.
I did see that, yeah.
So Seinfeld coming back again.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to bring that up. When Annie and her friends are talking about stories, they mentioned like a soup guy who like, but you have to be on your best behavior in the
yeah, he's
soup
the
kitchen.
meanest guy in the world.
Yeah.
He makes the best soup.
So, wow, I guess this takes place in the Seinfeld universe.
It actually technically happens before Seinfeld makes the reference. It actually is like the champion of the soup Nazi.
Oh, shit. So, like, they did it first.
They did it first.
Doesn't the soup Nazi's like a real guy, though, isn't he? And isn't he, like, super unhappy with the way he was portrayed?
Probably.
Yeah,
Would you be?
I guess. No soup for you. Tough shit, buddy.
And then Rosie O'Donnell, like there's the quote, I have been an excellent third baseman for as long as I or anyone can remember. That when she was help writing the letter that ultimately went to Tom Hanks's character, that's actually a reference to A League of Their Own, which came out the year before, because Rosie O'Donnell, Tom Hanks, and Bill Pullman all star in that movie.
Well, again, isn't that like metafictional, right? That like less than a year later, they're like, let's reference it.
I also love that Annie's brother is David Hyde Pierce, who's Frasier's brother in the show Frasier.
I was so happy to see him too, right?
Yeah. He's great. I need to get back into that show because I watched the first season. I was like, this is really good.
He's
surprisingly
easily
good.
the best actor in the whole cast too. Like, sorry,
Definitely
everybody else.
one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's so funny.
So, and it's funny too because it also like that takes place in Seattle. Like, there's so much connection.
So
to
this
that
takes
movie
place
in
in the Frasier universe and the Seinfeld universe, which would mean that Frasier and Seinfeld take place in the same universe too.
I wonder if Frasier ever actually made an appearance in Seinfeld. He might have.
I feel like he didn't, but you know,
I don't know because that's based on Cheers, right? And then I feel like Frasier cropped up. Maybe he was in Friends or something. He pops up in another sitcom, and I don't remember which it is. I'm like 80% sure of that.
Okay, sound off in the comments if you know what we're talking about.
Yeah, this is like older millennial stuff. Like,
yeah, this is
even
before
Gen,
our
like,
time. Yeah, we were a little
like
too
Gen
old.
X stuff. We're young millennials. We don't know this stuff as well as other people.
Yeah,
might.
come on, you old farts. Like, provide some fucking wisdom.
What we do know about is Toy Story, which Tom Hanks was doing the voice work on his day as off during the filming of this movie.
Oh shit, that's awesome.
Yeah, so
I am
same time.
so butthurt that they're making a Toy Story 5.
Okay, I've been thinking about the Pixar movies because you and I have been working on our top 100 list for later this year, or maybe I've been working on it and you've been.
Bitch, I'm getting to it. I'm dealing with Sharpays this weekend.
I've come to the conclusion in my own top 100 list that I actually sunsetted Pixar at Toy Story 3 and have never watched a Pixar movie since.
You know what? I don't think you're wrong to do that. I mean, Brave was okay, but it wasn't great. And then I don't even know that if I can name a Pixar movie post 2010.
They're all sequels, right? And I kind of was on the like Pixar makes original stories train for all of my childhood and was like, I didn't even, as a child, like I didn't even love Toy Story 2 and people really, really liked that movie. And then Toy Story 3 came out and just like blew me away to such a degree that I was like, I never need to watch another Toy Story movie again. I've actually never returned to Toy Story 3 because it was so good that it lives on in my memory as a perfect film.
I rewatched it a couple years ago during the pandemic and I was blah, right?
Yeah. So anyway, that's just the weird connection there. The legacy of this movie, it did get nominated for 2 Oscars, Best Original Screenplay and Best Original Song.
Okay.
I kind of like the Best Original Screenplay here.
I do too, but I don't know that it was good enough. I don't know that it was good enough to win, but it deserved to be nominated, certainly.
Yeah, it definitely deserves the nod because I think that it's so unique and it's such a swing.
Yeah, no kidding.
It was actually also like one of the most successful movies of 1993. It was the number 8th highest grossing movie of 1993 worldwide. And as a comparison, I pulled up 2024's. Can you guess what number 8 highest movie in worldwide was?
I'm gonna say like Kung Fu Panda 4.
You are stupid close. That's number 9, actually.
Oh shit. Okay.
Number 8 is Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire.
Oh, fuck off. All right.
I can't believe you came within 1, though. That's impressive.
Thank you. Well, I know my Kung Fu Panda, and I was very disappointed they were even making number 4.
That's great. And so it's considered one of the most successful rom-coms of all time. Box office wise, like it made like well over $200 million back in the 90s, which is insane.
Shit, that's a lot of money
movie.
Now. That's even more back then.
It did actual like crazy numbers back then, selling like the VHS of it. Like that secondary market was extra important back in the 90s, and it crushed that too.
Hey guys, remember VHSs?
And it was also the top rental in 1994, something that we don't ever can think about anymore. But this movie was big. Pretty much anybody who was probably over the age of 10 has seen this movie. Who was over the age of 10 in 1993.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, we were slightly too young for this movie when it came out, but we saw it now.
This is actually the one of 3 movies that stars Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan in roles together. And it's the most successful of the 3. The other one being You've Got Mail, obviously, which Jess swears by. I've never seen. And the third one is a movie called Joe versus the Volcano, which is maybe one of the most insane movies that I've ever heard.
I feel like you're trolling me. Joe versus the Volcano with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan.
Yes, let me pull up the tagline of this because I barely believe this movie exists myself. So the tagline of Joe versus the Volcano, which came out in 1990 and stars Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, is when a hypochondriac learns that he is dying, he accepts an offer to throw himself in a volcano at a tropical island, and along the way there, learns to truly live.
All right, Joe, maybe that'll be when I turn 33 this year, which is the same age Jesus was when he died, for the record. Maybe we'll do Joe. That's how we'll ring in my 33rd year on this wretched planet, Joe versus the Volcano.
It has a 5.9 rating on IMDb and not much higher on Letterboxd.
Okay, so like not great. That like not like as a professor, if I were grading that, I'd be like, maybe come talk to me after class. I don't think you're understanding the subject matter.
Yeah. Interesting premise, and there is one person on Letterboxd who is like, this movie is amazing and nobody understands it. And
is that you, Blake? Is it you?
Yeah. Here's to you, kid, but like, whoa.
Big swing.
And I think that's it.
I guess that's it. Did I say what my review was? I guess I've kind of been saying it this whole time. I'd probably
get into more detail if you want.
I just liked it. I'd give it like a 7.5. Like not quite an 8, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Maybe a 7.75.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough, right? Because this is a movie where there's elements that work extraordinarily well for me. There's elements of this movie that I really appreciated if I didn't think worked entirely well, and there was stuff that I was like, yikes, right?
Yikes.
Like this movie is all over the place in my opinion.
Yeah, justice for Walter.
Justice for Walter.
Yeah.
So, that being said, our next movie is we're doing our Oscar series next, and we have a movie that neither of us has ever seen before.
The Conversation.
The Conversation, because
with Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah, and we're actually doing 2 Francis Ford Coppola movies back to back because we'll also be doing The Godfather Part 2.
Yeah, a guy who has not been in the news at all within the last few months.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this because obviously I've seen the Godfather movies. Like, I've seen most of the Francis Ford Coppola iconic films, other than at this point Megalopolis and The Conversation, but the difference there being that The Conversation is supposed to be really, really good.
Is Megalopolis like available anywhere, or is that still floating around?
I think we could maybe rent it now, and that's as far as it goes. I don't think it's widely available to stream on anything, which is kind of strange. Like, it probably doesn't. I don't know what the economics look like of trying to put a movie on a streaming platform, but even something like Tubi, like I bet you that movie would do decent numbers on Tubi.
Yeah, no kidding, right? I mean, come on, it's something. It made headlines.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
wow.
It's not available anywhere right now for streaming.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh shit, dude.
that's wild.
Well, hey, it'll come out one of these days. I guess I'll
It's
just go
got to
back.
be for rent somewhere. I don't know. Just Watch is telling me that it's nowhere, but
Not with that attitude. It's not. All right.
oh
Well,
man.
maybe one of these days. Maybe that's what we'll do for my 33rd birthday is Megaopolis.
We'll just watch that. I don't think it deserves a full podcast episode.
Uh,
Although it might be so broken that it does.
yeah, it would be like a 5-hour podcast episode because we just have to keep talking about it.
Yeah.
All the strange choices that were made.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Is like the weirder the movie and maybe the more it doesn't work, the more the more there is to talk about the choices.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, well,
All right. I guess we'll see you next time. Tell your dad. Tell your mom. This is more your mom's movie than your dad's movie.
yep. If one of your parents are alive, tell them.
Jesus.
Yes.
All right. See you next time.
Bye.